A woman sells herself to a rich man for 3 nights to pay her father's debts. By the time her child is born is when her mission is over. The first time they met was in a darkly lit room. Charles hides behind a screen and asks Elisabeth one question after another. If Elisabeth was healthy, why didn't she get married? Why would she do such a thing? Elisabeth said she would sell everything she had for a living, but she knew that this man only needed her temporarily. Such obvious questioning made Elisabeth feel a little uncomfortable, but she accepted the job due to financial pressure. For the next 3 days, Elisabeth was placed in an isolated hotel. When she entered the room, there was a well-dressed gentleman sitting inside. He looked a little nervous and kept drinking in between the small talk. He told Elisabeth they only had 3 days together. In 10 months, once the baby is born. Whether the child was a boy or a girl, Elisabeth would be paid a considerable amount of money. But she would be paid on the condition that she kept it a secret and cut off all contact with the child. Elisabeth didn't say anything. A deal is a deal. She had no problem with it. So she turned around and started undressing. The first night, Elisabeth was on her side in bed and let Charles perform the ritual awkwardly. Although the two of them did not communicate, Elisabeth could tell that Charles was a true gentleman. Charles treated her with absolute respect. On the second night, Elisabeth was visibly more relaxed. She began to revel in the beauty of the intimacy, but she couldn't help but shed tears afterwards. It was a shame to sleep with a stranger. Charles saw the change in her mood and began to encourage Elisabeth to let out her frustrations. It was at this point their relationship seemed to have changed slightly. The third night, Elisabeth began to be brave enough to release her innermost desires. The passionate flow of pleasure went straight to her heart. It was also a formal farewell to their 3-day journey. 10 months later, Elisabeth gave birth to a baby girl, but before she had a chance to see it, the baby was taken away immediately. It's a long, hard labour and delivery. No mother can be indifferent to her child, and in the years that followed, Elisabeth missed her daughter more and more every day. Whenever her daughter's birthday came around, she would write down her wishes in her sketchbook and wished her a happy birthday from afar. 7 years passed. Elisabeth finally found out the news of her daughter, so she immediately went to meet her daughter as a governess. She learned from the servants that her daughter's name was Louisa. Louisa was a lonely and stubborn child. Louisa had already expelled 3 governesses in a row because she did not want to be disciplined. She doesn't go out in her spare time and often locks herself in the lake pavilion. When Louisa first saw Elisabeth, she maintained her usual unfriendly attitude. The first thing she said was to go away. Elisabeth was not upset by her daughter's arrogance. On the contrary, it strengthened Elisabeth's determination to stay and take care of her growing up. The next day, Duke Charles returned. When he saw Elisabeth, his face was full of shock. He asked Elisabeth to leave immediately, forcing him to hold back his shock. Elisabeth says she can't forget the sound of her daughter's laughter and everything that happened when she was born. Charles was very angry with Elisabeth for breaking the contract. But according to the governess's contract, he still had to keep Elisabeth here for a month. So to make his point, he told Elisabeth the story of what happened. 10 years ago, his wife had an accident and became a vegetable. Charles found Elisabeth in order to keep the marriage and continue the family line, but he never thought that fate would bring them together again. This is definitely the most terrible tutor. She would pick up the paint and pour it on her face when the child disobeyed her. Then she poured a cup of paint on her own face too. Elisabeth agreed to Louisa's father's request in order to teach her well. How Elisabeth punishes Louisa will be how she treats herself, but what she wanted to teach Louisa was much more than what was in the books. Louisa has been withdrawn since she was a child because of her long lack of motherly love. Her father, Charles, spoiled her so much that she developed a fearless personality. She resisted learning on her first day of class. She also condescendingly mocked Elisabeth for being a poor, uneducated person. When Elisabeth saw this, she locked Louisa in the classroom. No matter how much she cried, she would not be comforted. But Charles couldn't stand his daughter's suffering. He was so angry that he immediately asked to stop the course. However, Elisabeth's attitude was also very firm. After 2 days together, she found that Louisa had been neglected for a long time. Louisa had no ability to recognize herself. Elisabeth knew that this would help Louisa, but Louisa had to learn to obey her first. To reassure Charles, Elisabeth made a promise. No matter what punishment Louisa receives, she would also be punished along with her. Now that she had said that, Charles had to give in and comforted his daughter a few words and left, and Elisabeth did what she said she would do. Louisa was rebellious and did not eat dinner. She didn't eat dinner afterwards. She heard Louisa curse her to death. She also accepted it. She also flirtatiously told Louisa how to let her die. After a few rounds of exchanges, Louisa was gradually worn down by her. She started to be attracted to the card on the table. Elisabeth seized the opportunity and immediately began to teach her some basic words and grammar. Then she told a story about light and fire. She said that fire is like magic that can stop time. When the fire goes out, people don't have to follow the rules anymore. They can do whatever they want to do. And when the fire lights up again, everything will be as if it never happened. Louisa listened very carefully that day, but afterwards she started to go even further. Elisabeth told her the cruel truth in a fit of emotion. She said that once Louisa grew up, it would all leave her, because Louisa is a woman. When Louisa married, everything she owned would be her husband's. Louisa would lose everything. But there is one thing that no one can take away from her, that is the mind. And so Elisabeth succeeded in disarming her daughter with love and tolerance. Louisa began to stop resisting classes and started studying instead. Charles was grateful to see his daughter's growth, and he and Elisabeth slowly developed a different kind of affection for each other. At night, Charles came to his wife's bed and told her what was on his mind. For several years he only talked about his heart to his unconscious wife, but this time his mind flashed with the image of another person. At the same time, Elisabeth also had unspoken feelings for the man who had bought her virginity with money. She used to watch Charles swimming at the lake. She silently admired Charles's body through the blurred glass. Then she would subconsciously caress her neck. It was clear that her love was burning as well. The two of them met in the study that night. Charles took the initiative to tell Elisabeth about the events of 7 years ago. He wanted Elisabeth to tell him with conviction in order to suppress his feelings. The past is gone. It will never happen again. But he can deceive others, but not his own heart. When the two of them made eye contact again, their inner feelings instantly poured out. This night they are completely free from moral restraint to express the long-suppressed fire of the heart, and the sensitive Louisa spies on her father's relationship with Elisabeth. The girl was walking on the frozen lake when the ice suddenly broke and fell into the water. The woman saw and immediately jumped into the cold, biting water. She used her body to break through the ice cracks and rescued the girl. Although Elisabeth has always been by Louisa's side as a teacher, but her actions could not hide her identity as Louisa's real mother. She promised the sleeping Louisa that she would never leave her. As time passed, Louisa slowly began to reveal her heart to Elisabeth. Louisa knew that the sick lady was not her real mother, but she would go to see the sick lady every day, and Louisa loved the lake pavilion because she saw it as her own space with her mother. In the winter, it snowed a lot. Charles's father had returned. Lord Clare was a born hedonist and enjoyed all kinds of extravagant activities. Lord Clare held a Christmas ball right after his return. Charles never liked to dance, but when he's alone with Elisabeth, he can't help but to put his arm around her waist and spin around the room. After that, their relationship grew rapidly. Sometimes Charles even wanted to take her and daughter away with him. But Charles, as a married man and the heir to the family, he had a great responsibility on his shoulders. He would not allow himself to have these unrealistic thoughts. Soon after, a group of uninvited guests arrive at the estate. Charles's business is in trouble. He had to sell everything to pay off the loan. The cold wind of the night quickly took Charles's wife's life like a knife. Elisabeth, though she had no part in the affair, but she knew that Charles had something to do with it. Just then, Louisa came into Elisabeth's room. She accidentally saw Elisabeth's picture book. Finally, she realized that Elisabeth was her mother. She couldn't understand why Elisabeth would give her away, but Elisabeth said she sold Louisa for £500. Louisa is happy that Elisabeth is making a lot of money. By the end of the story, they cast off their chains and forgave each other for their sins. the family left the manor in a carriage and set out to find a new life. This is the end of the movie, Firelight. Life is inevitably unexpected. Once people encounter the unexpected, it will take a long time to adapt and change and sort out their emotions and desires. This process is painful, but we have to be honest with our own hearts and hold on to the person and the opportunity that can help you save yourself. This is the only way to get out of your misery. Time can indeed heal everything, but the necessary prerequisite is to let go so that what needs to end can end. If we insist on holding on to the past, we allow the damage to continue and the pain to increase. Charles and Louisa both did the foolish thing of running away. Fortunately, they met a strong-willed lover and mother like Elisabeth, so their painful past was quickly cut off by the sharp edge of love state had been his and his wife's wedding home. But during the 10 years his wife was paralysed, the estate became more like a prison for everyone. Charles did love his wife, but he never thought about whether she wanted to live like this. He had lied to himself for 10 years. Perhaps he also hurt his wife for 10 years, so he put out the fire in a tormented state. Then he opened all the doors and windows, leaving his wife's body exposed to the covers. He promised that he would repay God, and prayed that God would look after his wife.